Okay, so now we get to the exciting part of the report, the cultural values. So this is partially based on Gert Hofstede's research on cultural differences. I think that the Cultural Intelligence Center expanded and added some of their own definitions, but I'm definitely really, really interested to do the original assessment from Hofstede's Insights website. And so I'm just going to go through this one to see what I think. So this is super, super fascinating. These are all different types of cultural values that have been observed by different countries around the world, and we find different patterns of values across different sets of cultures. So as you can see here, the clusters of cultures that they've identified with these patterns, broadly speaking, are as a third culture kid, the cluster that I relate to is the Anglo cluster, being a British born firstborn in this, so second generation, I guess you would put it that way. And then obviously the other one that relates to me is called Confucian Asia, which is different from Southern Asia. Confucian Asia is like China, Hong Kong, Japan, Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan. So my parents are from Taiwan. I lived in Hong Kong. I also lived in China as well on the border. So like Anglo and Confucian Asia are my cultural clusters. So the first one is individualism versus collectivism. I think this is the one that everybody knows about the most, which is why it comes first. And it's also the one that perhaps is most obvious between cultures too. So individualism is obviously an emphasis on individual goals and individual rights, and collectivism is about group goals and personal relationships. That is the high-level definition provided in this report. Obviously, it gets really, really complicated the way people talk about this. There's entire areas of research in psychology focused just on that domain alone. It's probably the most popular, as I say. What's really interesting here is that my score is within the collectivism box, which is correlated with Confucian Asia, which basically means that I care about group goals and personal relationships, whereas it is like in distinct opposing contrast to individualism, where the Anglo side of me would technically be, which is emphasizing individual goals and individual rights. I found that interesting because I was trying to think, like, did it ask me the question like once or more than once or not? Because I could have answered differently. I think when you're a third culture kid, sometimes you can sit on the fence a bit when it comes to thinking about how you might respond to these types of questions. Because I'm like, well, it depends. If I was in a context full of other individualistic people, like in an Anglo environment, I'm probably more inclined to act more individualistic. Whereas if I'm in a collectivist environment, like in Hong Kong, I'd be more like that. So it's really, really difficult because like we are so chameleon-like in the way that we conduct ourselves, because that is what we grew up doing to survive. We realized that in order to be accepted within a particular culture, we had to fit in and act in a socially acceptable way. So I find it really interesting how I've come high on the collectivism and low on the individualism, on the basis that I really actually feel like an individualist at the end of the day. And I think that most people from Confucian Asia would see me that way as well. So I wonder if that the way I answered the questionnaire today is just based on the fact that like I've reflected on the fact that group goals and personal relationships have become increasingly important to me on a personal level over time, as in someone who tends to come from an individualistic perspective, historically has decided that it actually would be a nice thing to have a much more collectivist mindset. I do wonder if that's a function of age. As you get older, you start caring more about settling down and having communities and families and stable things going on. So collectivism feels like it matters more. Or maybe it's because I'm currently working in an online community, and a lot of the time I spend thinking about community related goals. Either way, I am surprised because I really didn't think that I would land there. And I think it is what it is. I'm definitely going to think about that a little bit more. Power distance is to do with like equality and decision making, in the sense that if you have high power distance, it means that essentially you default to people who have superior status and stuff making decisions, and that's that really. So Confucian Asia sits in the middle, which is where I am, whereas Anglo is on the low power distance side, and I think that's right. Like following the middle sounds about right for me. It's like I don't think that I am so strong on like yielding to authority, and I also don't think that I'm like so damn democratic that like I don't think that any top-down decisions need to be made at all. I think that Confucian Asia in the middle is definitely where I am. Uncertainty avoidance is to do with like how much you emphasize flexibility and adaptability versus planning and predictability. So if you have low uncertainty and avoidance, it means that you are not trying to avoid uncertainty, right? You're happy to be flexible in the moment and adapt to a situation as it rises. Whereas if you avoid a certain uncertainty at all costs and have high uncertainty avoidance, it means that you really want to plan everything in life. You want to predict what's going to happen. And this is a really interesting one because it is definitely a function of personality in so many ways. But the fact that there are actual countries or cultures that have distinct differences in uncertainty avoidance is so interesting, because you start thinking about like why that is, like from like more of like a like how hard life is type of perspective. Like people who have tough lives might be might have low or high uncertainty avoidance, and I mean, in this case, it's talking about Latin Europe and Latin America, which are traditionally countries that struggle more and are a bit poorer. They kind of want to avoid uncertainty, whereas like countries like richer countries like Anglo, Eastern Europe and Nordic Europe are okay with uncertainty because they just feel more confident to deal with it. They are not struggling to survive as much, you could argue. So again, I fall in the middle with Confucian Asia. I think that sounds about right. I think the classic default sort of TCK responses, anything that falls in the middle sounds about right to me. Competitive versus cooperative. So I've obviously come up competitive. Finally, a scale where I am actually in the Anglo box as opposed to the Confucian box, which is fantastic. So the first three were all Confucian, and finally I've got an Anglo tick. So I emphasize competition, assertiveness, and achievement over collaboration, nurturing, and family, which is a very sort of Nordic Europe and sub-Saharan African approach to cultural values. Again, Confucian is in the middle, and I'm not there with Confucian. So I think this is really fascinating because definitely growing up in an international school run by a British education system and British expats who moved to Hong Kong, like I was educated with a very, very British style, and competition was like a big part of that. And assertiveness and achievement, all these type of very Anglo ideas is basically how I was raised and educated. So I'm not surprised that I fall in this box together with all other Anglo and Germanic Europe people. Definitely makes sense to me. Yeah. And okay, so short term versus long term. So this is the emphasis on having immediate outcomes like success now versus long term planning, i.e., success later. And I have come back to the Confucian box with long term. So I find this really, really interesting because I always thought that I'm more of an immediate outcomes type of person, which is where the Anglo box is. But for some strange reason, I've come out on the long term planning Confucian box. I am definitely surprised by that. I don't see myself as somebody who is emphasizing long term plans at all. I'm so live in the moment, live in the present. I wonder again if that is a function of age. It's definitely something that's perked my curiosity. I like to think about the implications of things when they affect people for sure, but I definitely wouldn't expect myself to fall in that box. But then if that's how most people in Confucius Asia think, and I grew up in Confucius Asia, like, I'm kind of not surprised, I guess. Like, my formative years, 7 to 17 years old, were in Hong Kong, within a Confucian environment, so maybe that's why. And I've just forgotten because I live in England for the past 15 years or whatever. Okay, so low context versus high context. So this is to do with how you like to communicate. Like, if you are in a low context environment, it means that like you don't need a lot of context to communicate because you can just communicate explicitly using words. Whereas if you are in a high context environment, it means that you need a lot of context to understand people because their style of communication is indirect. And by indirect, we mean like their tone and just the general context in general. Like, you need to be hugely context aware to understand how people are communicating. So this is interesting because obviously in Anglo environments, people prefer to have that kind of explicit communication style where you don't need to have much context to explain what's going on. Whereas the Confucian is, again, in the high context side, where it's like how you communicate is totally a result of what is going on around you, what context you're in. Are you in school? Are you in public? Like, these like communication tones and how you should be, how you should come across, all changes depending on context. And so I find myself in the middle with this one. So this is another interesting one where it's like being in the middle is actually also not confusion. So it's like I'm definitely somewhere in between direct or an indirect communication style. And I think that sometimes TCKs can kind of default to not really knowing like how to communicate because of the fact that they've been thrown off in so many different situations where they may have communicated wrong or inappropriately that they end up sort of like being a bit confused about how to communicate certain things. And so I guess maybe that explains why I'm a bit neutral. I think my response to that question would have probably been a bit neutral. Like, I'm like, it really just depends. Being versus doing is interesting. So being is about being, as in emphasizing the present moment and the quality of life, whereas doing is about being busy and meeting goals. And I fall in the doing box with Anglos, and the being box is in the middle here with Confucian. And so that's really fascinating because I think, again, this is relating to the fact that I clearly have been raised in an environment where everything is about being busy all the time and meeting goals. I find this interesting though, because like, I think that when I'm in UK, I'm in more of a doing mindset. But when I go to back home to Hong Kong, like I shift. I definitely notice myself shifting to a being mindset. And what that means is that like so much of like existence and growing up and living in Asia is just appreciating the beingness of it all, the presentness of it all, just sort of like stopping to smell the roses type vibe going on. Like it's like what are you doing? We're just hanging out, right? And what are your plans? We're just enjoying this moment in the sun because you never know if it's going to rain tomorrow. Like, and it's like, okay, and have you got any plans? And it's sort of like, no, this having no plan is the plan. And it's like this kind of like very, very Confucian vibe. I can't explain it. Like, I think that definitely like when Anglo people come over to Asia and then they sort of like notice how social planning works and how people go about making plans is like so like laissez-faire or whatever you want to call. They're a bit like, so what time should we meet, or what time's the cinema? It's like, just meet around 12 and then we'll just wait for everyone to get there, and then like whenever everyone's arrives, we'll then go check and see what movies have spare seats available, and then if there aren't, then we'll just have dinner instead. And it's all very much like to white people, this is like, how can you plan anything like this socially? And like, I'm not saying all people within Confucian Asia are like this, but this kind of attitude where it's acceptable, the idea that this is how certain groups of people just plan everything in life is just absolutely mind-boggling. It's like, what? It's like how can you I need to put it in the freaking diary, and they're just like, diary? what for? It's the weekend. You don't need to diarize anything. So I definitely find this one really, really fun because, like, I definitely, like, I like to be in being mode. Like, I really feel like I'm on holiday when I go to Asia because I don't have to be in doing mode so much. Um, so that one's quite fun. Universalism versus particularism. So this is the idea that like universalism is about the universal rules, standards that apply to everyone. Doesn't matter where you come from, like rich or poor or anything. It's just the same rules apply, like the rule of law type thing. Whereas particularism is like specifics. It's like, well, you'd have certain standards based on certain relationships. So there's a lot more dynamics when it comes to kind of like thinking about someone's role in relation to you. Like, do they have more power than you or whatever? Like, should you respect them more? Because like in Asian families, there's this the real sense of sort of like hierarchy and how you speak to your parents and things like that, like really respecting your elders or whatnot, and having different standards for those relationships than you would with your peers. So yeah, I obviously fall in Confucian Asia box and the Anglo boxes and the Universalism category. I definitely have different standards for my different relationships depending on my role in relation to them. That makes total sense to me, right? I think that I wasn't actually raised in a traditionally Chinese family whereby there was a very large sort of like power dynamic going on between parent and child. Because my dad is actually super, super westernized in his approach to raising children. So I do actually find that quite curious in that sense that like, why would I have answered in that particular way? I suspect that I answered in that way when I was thinking about a specific scenario in my mind where I was like, well, that the reality of life is that people are biased. It's like this idea that like you can have general standards on how you want to treat people in general, for example, like always be kind or whatever, but then like the idea that like, well, in reality people aren't often like that. In reality people can be pretty damn mean to certain types of people that they just are unfortunately mean to, and they change their standards based on whether they think that person's worthy of their time or things like that. And so I think it's just like really interesting how I definitely change my standards like most Confucian people do based on those relationships. The innate understanding of hierarchy is like just a part of Asian culture for sure in so many ways, and knowing that you shouldn't cross lines and boundaries is just like an unspoken rule for like operating. Otherwise you wouldn't know how to survive in like here's this fascinating thing. It's like, you know, it's like if you go into a restaurant, right, like your waitress is your boss in that environment, so it's like you better be fucking nice to the waitress if you want them to do anything for you, you know, say thank you, say please. And there is just this power dynamic shift. It's because like I'm like in that situation they are serving you, and therefore it doesn't matter if you're paying for the food, like you still but got to be respectful to them. And I think that I don't know how to explain this actually. I think I'm doing a really poor job at explaining it, but I just think that people will adjust their standards based on those dynamics in the relationship. I don't know. I'm not sure. I might skip this part out, to be honest. Right, finally, we're on the last one. Oh, no, okay, there's two more. Okay, so neutral non-expressive versus effective expressive. So this one is to do with whether or not so neutral non-expressive is like non-emotional communication. So you basically hide your feelings, which is obviously a very Confucian Asian thing to do. I don't know why I say obviously, as if I expect people watching and listening to my video to know that, but definitely hiding your feelings is quite normal in Asian culture, in the sense that like because there's so much emphasis on collectivism, this idea of like group harmony and like all the group, like how to do things in the interest of the entire group as opposed to like yourself. So it's like hiding your feelings is kind of in many ways like a consequence of trying to promote ideas like group harmony for collectivist goals. Whereas like effective expressive, on the other hand, is like the emphasis on expressive communication and sharing your feelings is like a really, really sort of like, I would say Anglo thing, but Anglo's not in that box. Anglo's in the middle. It's obviously a very Arabic thing, Latin American and Latin Europe and sub-Saharan African thing, to be very expressive of your feelings and stuff. And I think that is absolutely fascinating because, like, I definitely know that is true. Because, well, I've rated myself in that box. I don't identify with any of those cultures, but when I think about why I emphasize communication of feelings and expression and stuff, like, I can relate to the relationships that I choose to make as to why that is definitely true for me. I've had an Arab boyfriend. I've had a boyfriend that like grew up in Africa. And so I definitely, like, I get that. Like, I totally get the whole, like, expressive, effective thing, and I like it. I clearly like it. So I'm so not Confucian on this one at all, or Anglo for that matter. And this one is a really, really interesting finding for me because, like, it suggests to me that I should go move to Egypt, or maybe I should go check out Peru, or or you know, I don't know, like, that just makes so much sense. Like, these are the countries I should travel to. In fact, I have not even traveled to a lot of these countries before, and so it's like the fact that, like, I like that so much suggests to me that I'd have a ball of a time if I ever did my van life trip in those countries. So if you have any suggestions on which sub-Saharan Africa, Latin Europe, or Latin America, or Arabic country I should visit, let me know and leave it in the comments. Okay, finally, so we are at the final cultural value. Monochronic linear versus polychronic nonlinear. Gotta love these big technical terms. What the hell does that mean? So monochronic is about being on time. It's about being punctual, which is a very Anglo thing, right? Everything is about timekeeping and productivity and efficiency. These ideas are so damn Anglo. I can't even begin to express how Asian people would laugh seeing Anglo people get worked up about it. Like, for real, I'm not joking. Polychronic nonlinear is obviously about multitasking and being okay with interruptions in your work and personal life. And your work and personal life is all combined and meshed together, whereas with the monochronic one, your personal life and your work life are quite separate from each other. There's a clear boundary and distinction to be made. So it's like, I have obviously, again, fallen into the weird box of countries that I have never lived in or had much experience or exposure to. Anglo is clearly on the monochronic side, as I said, Confucian somewhere in the middle, and I am very polychronic apparently. Now, I don't know if this is to do with, like, something else going on, something deeper, to do with my personality or whatever, like just being very skewed strongly towards, like, loving this weird sort of way of being, which I've definitely say weird because I've noticed it in myself and people notice it in me. They think I'm so weird for being so okay with multitasking and interruptions and all that type of stuff and combining my work and personal life. I have absolutely 100% noticed that people think I'm weird like that. And I mean, the fact that that is so me, and it's not really Confucian either, to me suggests like these are functions of personality. And I think this is the bit that gets really interesting because, like, even though the predictability of these cultural things are like separate from like personality traits, like often if you want to do the analysis and deep dive, you can start to look for correlations and like you know, this is like what researchers do. They like have this hypothesis in mind and they're like, okay, I reckon that people from these cultures also have high correlation with these types of personality traits. And so I think that I would definitely follow that line of inquiry if I was a researcher within this organization on a personal level and I had access to the database or whatever. I'd just be like, ooh, let's see what happens, like if they've collected personality data too, which they obviously probably haven't. But the point being is that this is very relieving for me. In a way, it's relieving for me because I live in Anglo environments. I've lived in Confucian Asian environments, but I have never lived in Arabic, Latin America, Latin Europe, or sub-Saharan African environments. But that kind of thing, that kind of value is the norm there. And what that means to say is that everyone believes that that is how you should be living your life, that this is the way of life, right? They, as I said, even people from Confucian Asia would kind of laugh at like Anglo cultures for being so damn obsessed with like punctuality, because like even to Confucian Asian people, they're like, well, time is a movable thing, right? They're kind of like, you adjust the time based on when people arrive. This kind of notion is such a fascinating distinction in cultures, because like literally it makes people upset when people don't arrive on time here, right? In Asian cultures, like, oh well, they're not here, let's just be okay with it. Because and normally in Confucian environments, it's not the damn person's fault if they're late. It's because the bus is stuck in traffic and like literally is not moving or something. There are so many external forces outside of a person's control within a Confucian environment that they don't have the luxury to have that kind of level of punctuality as much, in my opinion. Things are always delayed or not on time. They're just not damn as efficient. So you could say that is because of the lack of efficiency in certain environments. But saying that, Hong Kong is way more efficient than Britain. No offense, England. I don't know why I said that, as if like I'm proud to be from both. Hong Kong is like one of the most efficient countries in the world, right? And again, Japan is also a stupendously efficient country, right? So it's like, and Japan care about punctuality, right? But like, I think that there is some distinction to be made between like the context in which that punctuality occurs. And I think that in Asian environments, it's like you can be punctual in this situation and not in that situation. Whereas in British, it's like whether it's a work meeting or a social meeting, you turn up on time. That kind of vibe. So anyway, I'm fascinated by this again because of the fact that like, I don't know why, like how I ended up enjoying like combining my work and personal life and combining and just the interruptions of life and multitasking, to me feels like, for the most part, it feels like a skill or a strength for me. If I'm in an environment where people don't like that, like obviously when situation arises where you have to multitask, it doesn't bother me or faze me, so it becomes a skill set within that context. But obviously with that not being kind of the norm, it means that people might perceive me to be as somebody who doesn't sort of like structure things enough as well. So I don't know. Again, these are the poor countries, right? And the richer countries on that side. So it's like, I don't know. I guess all I'm saying is that the whole point of this assessment is a baseline for a launching pad for self-inquiry. Like, it's designed to help you figure out who you are, what you care about in relation to what other people typically care about, and just become more self-aware and more self-actualized and all that type of fluffy psychological talk. And I really enjoyed doing this questionnaire for this reason, and that's why I wanted to share it with you. So anyway, this is a very, very long and rambly video. I do apologize if you feel like you're going to sleep after listening to me talk about culture this much. But if you have stuck around because you found it interesting, then thank you. Thank you for watching my videos and supporting my channel. I really, really appreciate you. If you think there's anybody else that would be interested in me nerding out about cultural intelligence or any other topics related to culture, broadly speaking, please do share my video or the channel with other people, and I would really appreciate that. And until next time, I guess I will have to start posting videos more regularly again. To be completely honest, it's been a very, very long time, and I felt very nervous recording this video. It's been a year to be precise, and it's still in the passion category, but I'm starting to look at it differently. I'm starting to wonder what it would be like to take it more seriously. So I definitely think that you will start to see more videos which are basically my attempt to take things a bit more seriously. So anyway, thank you once again. Hope you have a wonderful day and rest of the week. And until next time, enjoy the summer.